Oh yeah, much better in that rig. Yeah. So I'm Eduardo Vasquez. I'm the head of Agrocarbon Chamber at the Ag Industry in Brazil. I'm also the chairman of C-Carbon, which is a center that belongs to USP, the University of São Paulo, the largest research center for agriculture in the global south. I hope to next year will be the largest center in the world, but still have a lot of things to do. I'm really glad to be here, and it will be a very informal discussion to make it much better, for all of us. So I will make some questions, but feel free to intervene and interact, and make it much better for all of us. And to start with you, it's as a chairman of the Global South for the CDR Coalition. Can you tell about the background of the coalition, who you are, what you're doing, the main goals, please?
Yeah, absolutely, with pleasure. Can I just quickly check if the audio is what? Can you
I
hear
think
us?
you need to get closer to the
Stay
microphone.
closer, is this better?
Yeah.
Okay, we can also up the volume if necessary, but if we, I'll try to do it like this. All right. Thank you. Wonderful to be here. A bit later than we expected, still very warm, but exciting. My name is Wietse Vroon. I work for Exploratus Technologies as the Chief Technology Officer. We have a biochar project in Peru. That's the main focus. We actually like to think of ourselves as project developers for projects that build carbon economies. So to actually look at waste, agricultural waste streams, and find value for them. Biochar is one element in that vision, in that puzzle. I'm also very honored to be the chairman of the Global South CDR Coalition. This is a brainchild, I think, in all fairness, of Sebastian Benhart, who many of you probably may know. He does a lot of work in CDR and in policy. We got together earlier this year and we formed a coalition of Global South CDR providers, I might say. So we have companies, say, I think we're currently at 15 members across different pathways. So it's companies that produce biochar, there are companies involved in enhanced rock weathering, we have direct air capture across the three continents, Latin America, Africa and Asia, and obviously growing. We also have a group of what we call friends of the coalition, so scientists, policymakers, influencers, people that like to engage with us. And so that's the idea. We really exist to scale, to build high quality carbon removal in the global south by looking at what can be the enabling conditions, mainly focusing on policy. So many of us have an affinity with Europe. You may have roots in Europe, like myself, I'm Dutch by origin. And we see that whatever happens in Europe is relevant for the European Union, but often has a spillover effect in the rest of the world. There is this thing called the Brussels effect, where legislation set in Brussels sometimes becomes a blueprint, an inspiration for other jurisdictions, but also the European Union itself is or can be a very significant market for international carbon credits. So being at the table, informing policymakers, engaging with them, taking away some misconceptions perhaps, nudging policy such that it can become enabling for high quality carbon removal within Europe and internationally is really what we like to do. I think I'll leave it there.
Great. And it's interesting in Brazil, we tend to talk a lot about the biggest product from Europe for exports is regulations. And I really want to hear a little bit more about Europe, because I know there's some news and it will be interesting to see your views about it.
Yeah, it's been quite an interesting plot twister. I'm not sure if Netflix is watching, but this will be material for our next series. So a bit of context, Europe has been quite ambitious in the last so many years in terms of establishing a new Green Deal with a lot of environmental policies and climate policies. Europe already has a 2030 target of 55% emission reductions and a commitment to achieve net zero by 2050. What it did not have was an intermediate target for 2040. The Commission originally proposed we could try to aim for a 90% emission reduction and then maybe do some additional work on the side to also help companies in the global south. And that was supported, or in line you could say, with a report from the European Scientific Advisory Board on Climate Change, who said that Europe is actually quite well on its way to achieve those targets, and a 90 to 95% reduction could be feasible. Politically, though, the dynamic has been very different over the last couple of years. We've had elections on national levels, on European level, and I think it's fair to say that whatever seemed to be a high green ambition a couple of years ago is no longer as self-evident. So there's been a lot of fighting back and forth and saying, is it 90% realistic, or do we need to care more about competitiveness, war in Ukraine, other stuff that is happening? There's a lot of concerns there. So it was really exciting to see if the European Commission would maintain, the European Council would maintain this 90% target. Actually, yesterday the European Parliament voted on this initial proposal and have settled for a 90% emission reduction, but including a 5% flexibility, they call it, to include international carbon credits under the Article 6 mechanism. So you could say it's 85% domestic reductions plus another 5 to be found internationally. So the exciting thing is that there's always been, it's been a bit of going back and forth, like new to me from extreme right, trying to even further reduce this to 83%, that didn't make it. So we are at this 85 plus 5% now, the way it looks. It still needs to be, so the positions need to be ironed out over the coming months. They call this trilogue negotiations, and then it will become final early 2026, probably. It also looks like the main focus will be Article 6.4 credits as opposed to 6.2. We'll have to see how that plays out. Either way, I think the relevance of this is that if Europe will ratify this, that could mean an annual volume as of 2036, and like a bit of ramping of curve, of an estimated 240 megatons per year of international carbon credits. It's a huge volume, and I think I see it really as a use case for Article 6. Article 6 exists when you have the frameworks that have been in place for a while now, people are working on Article 6.4, but this would really boost the use of that mechanism, and for quite big volumes. Now, the tricky thing is, what does it mean in terms of quality, right? Is this just Europe's ambition out the window? It does not have to be. And our position is that there is the real risk. I think we have a history, also in carbon credits, where not every carbon credit is the same. So there's been some criticism on the reliance of international carbon credits to meet 2040 targets. Those critics are wrong, but I think we can flip this around. And if we focus on high quality international credits, and especially removal credits, and that may also include potentially non-durable removals as deforestation, I think we really have a good case to make this work for climate action rather than it just being a distraction. I think that's really what we're looking for.
Sorry. Yeah. And do you know, like, the Global South coalition, do you guys focus on, because I'm part of it, do we focus on durables in the R, or CR as a whole? Because these international credits, it's like pretty vague right now what it's going to be, right? It could also just be reductions.
It could. The way things look now, the way we understand it, it's just being referred to as Article 6, which includes, it's actually mainly emission reduction credits. So we would argue the safest bet is on removal credits. Now we as a group represent highly durable, high quality, long-term, permanent carbon removals. Direct air capture, biochar, rock weathering, those kinds of technologies that you see on the back wall there, for the ones present here. The thing is, if you would just limit from a European policy perspective to those kinds of removals, the gap in terms of scaling it up is so insanely large that probably makes sense to include nature-based removals as well, especially in the beginning. And I think those are really good removals as well. Now, we could have a conversation, and I suspect we might, about the like-for-like principle, as in what is the use case for Euro credits. There's a lot of short-term emissions as well associated to land use change, agriculture, where nature-based removals may make a lot of sense. But just to be clear and to answer your question, as far as we are concerned, we are mainly focusing on the high-quality, durable, technology-based removals.
Thank you so much. And Axel, exactly, you mentioned the size, the potential size of the market in Europe. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Global South and our role connected to market in Europe and the challenges?
Yeah.
This one's working. Yeah, so very glad to be here. I'm the CEO of Net Zero. So we do biochar, mostly in Brazil, bit in Africa. I think we need to go back to the little joke you were making about Europe being exporting regulation. Actually, CDR in the Global South is really a play with Ricardo's comparative advantages. The comparative advantage of Europe might be regulation. The comparative advantage of Global South is the sun. And the sun allows CDR in multiple ways. If you look at us around this panel, the sun allows cheap electricity, energy for direct air capture. The sun allows biomass and photosynthesis for things like biochar. And the sun allows hot weather and rain for enhanced rock weathering. And so the place on Earth to do CDR is the Global South. That's where it is the most efficient. That's where it is the cheapest. That's also where it generates the highest level of co-benefits. So in a way, it's a no-brainer. The Global South should be the provider of carbon removal in all forms, in the kind of nature-based, technology-based, because in the end, it boils down to energy from the sun. And it's great to try to do that in Norway or in wherever south of Chile or wherever, but it's going to be more expensive. So I think from a purely economic standpoint, from a volume standpoint, the Global South is where CDR should happen. We'll touch maybe a bit later. There's also notion of co-benefits and helping those who are least responsible for climate change to adapt and get some funding, which is another dimension. So if we look at high-level numbers, just the Global South can do the 5 to 10 gigatons that are required by IPCC in 2050. Of course, there will be other places where CDR is going to be done, but the place from a pure energy, physical standpoint is the Global South. Now, there's been an issue. There will be issues around ramp up, about quality, traceability, and of course, regulation that might open more or less the gate. But looking from Mars, everything, it's in the Global South that takes the CDR play, and that the future of climate is kind of at stake.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. And Maria, coming back to when we talk about the high integrity, because we know this is it will be a topic and should be a topic for obvious reasons. We don't want low quality. We want high quality. Even for to export to import, it doesn't matter.
So this is a great question, and luckily for us, we've already got a couple of mechanisms, and I really enjoy that we're talking about Europe as an exporter of legislation and of policy. So when we talk about durable removals and we think about it in terms of alignment, we've already got some pre-established frameworks that can create a basis for this quality. So looking at Article 6, we're here at COP, in the Blue Zone, we've had a lot of discussions about what permanents are we looking for. We're already discussing the 100 years plus. So these conversations establish a basis. But Europe actually has something fantastic that we see already other countries exporting. And maybe you could talk a little bit about Brazil. But the European CRCF is a fantastic framework where we go in and we really assess the quality of the methodologies. We just had one on enhanced rock weathering. Cascade participated in it, Astrometric participated in it. It was honestly incredibly well structured, and I know Eduardo will be working on some methodologies here for Brazil. So when we look at these international opportunities, we need to make sure that the quality of the market is not flooded with rubbish. And because this opportunity of these 5%, as Vita mentioned, are a blueprint for what Article 6 could really look like at scale. So we need to be tech agnostic, like for like, I also agree, but when we think about how we can take this further, it really, really matters what we do today. And so I think coalitions such as ours and the policy that we put forward, I mean, we got our first paper out before the summer on the last day of Parliament, matter. Because right now, 45% of all permanent durable carbon removal comes from the Global South globally.
Let's go back. Okay, now it's working. And when you mentioned the co-benefits, and I want to go back to Thor, just saying about when you talk the direct air capture in Kenya, you do have a project there. There's a lot of co-benefits. Can you explain for us what is it means and what the act of co-benefits?
Yeah. So I'm Thor. I'm the CEO of Serona Technologies, where we build direct air capture technology. We have operations in Kenya and in the UAE. And so Kenya is a very interesting place for us to go, as you mentioned, because of the energy. The natural endowments basically are really well suited from the energy side, but also from the surface storage side, especially in Kenya with the Rift Valley. And it's interesting because in CDR, I think there's a big history of looking at co-benefits from the traditional voluntary markets, where we were looking at different forests, and it's like, okay, well, which of these forests have the best co-benefits to sort of maximize the benefit we can do to the world? And when we think about direct air capture, we usually don't think about co-benefits because it's just technology that you deploy somewhere. Perhaps you're going to be able to build jobs in Louisiana or something like that. But actually, what we found is that in Kenya, it's really interesting for the country. And so the story of direct air capture in Kenya is the story of James Mwangi, who used to work at Dalberg, or still works there, I think, and they had a mission for the energy ministry in Kenya, trying to help them understand like what the country should be, what should be the Kenya's strategy from an energy perspective, and they saw that Kenya had all the different things you needed to do carbon removal on one side, and on the other side they saw that Kenya has too much clean energy. And so they said, well, that's interesting. There's all these companies that are looking for cheap clean energy and to store CO2. Well, let's ask them to come and do this in Kenya, because then it's going to help by bringing more demand. And the problem that Kenya had was that they actually had overbuilt energy. So they had invested way too much in capex, and so, for example, they have 3 gigawatts of electricity production potential, but they only have 2 gigawatts of demand. And so everybody there is paying a very high price for energy because everybody has to pay for all that capex. And so if you would bring in more big demand, then it would help counterintuitively bring the prices down. And so that's what they decided to do, is to say, hey, come and do direct air capture here in Kenya. It's going to help the whole country by bringing electricity prices down. So that's one argument for why it's really interesting to do direct air capture in Kenya for Kenya. So they were the ones putting everybody in. The other aspect is that there's not a lot of economy happening in Kenya. The economy is struggling. And so if you bring in these huge industrial projects, it actually creates a lot of jobs when you're constructing these projects. It doesn't create so many jobs sort of in operations and in the long run, but it does create very high quality jobs. And so we're going to be hiring engineers, for example, and inspiring the generation, the young generation, to build technology for the future. So we think that's really interesting. So it's a different kind of co-benefit that you'll find for direct air capture in the Global South, but it's usually very interesting. It's also very interesting for buyers when we present this project. But I'm also curious to hear about the others on the panel, because when we think about co-benefit, it's usually local communities and farmers and all of that. So I'm curious to hear your take on where do you see co-benefit with your own project?
Right.
So I can add to that. Axel also has some points. So we work with farmers and with the communities, both in Enhanced Weathering and biochar, have real direct benefits on the ground for farmers. And we're not just talking about the capital, we're talking about, we see yield increases from 20 to 30% with enhanced rock weathering. We're seeing added crop rotations, so the quality of the produce, but really what matters to them is that they can lower their cost structure. So with the use of enhanced rock weathering, we provide the rock powders at a minimum cost, and they spread it themselves. what they're able to do is reduce the use of chemical fertilizers. In Brazil, it's a very interesting market for remineralizers, given the high input costs of chemical fertilizers. Remineralizers are certified. It's one of only 2 countries in the world, I believe, that have certified rock powders. And this is done by MAPA, which is the Brazilian institution that certifies through the Ministry of Agriculture the quality of these rock powders. So we have a very good infrastructure and a knowledge base to really help local farmers. Now, when you ask me long term, where do we really want to see the benefit? It's figuring out how we can educate farmers to benefit from this shared capital of these credits so that we can really create a secondary economy. But I'll let Axel talk to biochar.
I just made a point, and then Axel, you can also help to answer, to bring to the table not just the co-benefits, which is really interesting to hear. Some of them, like now, it's really cool to understand like the reduction of the price of the energy. It's really, really interesting. But at the same time, we also talk about financing now, because all those technologies are really cool, but we have to invest now in order to have those technologies. Can you frame a little bit for us?
Yeah, maybe I'll touch very quickly on co-benefits and then talk about finance. I think, advanced rock weathering is a very good, use case, let's say, for co-benefits. Is probably the poster child of co-benefits because there's the whole story around improving farmers, improving soils, improving yields, and basically improving resilience to climate change that actually the farmers in the south are kind of starting to really feel. There are other things like creating jobs and so on. There's something that is sometimes a bit forgotten is what do people do today with all those wasted crop residues? And so they leave them in the fields where can develop diseases or catch fire. They voluntarily burn it, or they dump it somewhere where it emits methane and it's going to rot. And so there's a whole thing around, air pollution and additional greenhouse gas release that is reduced thanks to biochar, and that's another of the co-benefits. And I think generally speaking, and we see for different technologies, and there are different angles of co-benefits. But that's the nice thing about carbon removal in the global south, is that not only we are solving the global problem of concentration of CO2, but we are helping the ones who suffer the most and can adapt the least, and who are the least responsible for the emissions. Because per capita, if you look at the global debt of CO2, it's not the countries of the south who have put, all the CO2 in the atmosphere. So there's a sense of justice here. So that brings me to capital, because capital needs to come to invest in those projects. And capital will come, at least at the beginning, from the north. Like, by the way, demand for CBRs, because that's where we can pay. It's an interesting time for the industry, because there was, in the kind of 2020, 2021, 2022, a bit of a hype on, lots of technologies, lots of startups, basically everyone kind of trying to fill all the technologies that are on the wall on the other side. And then things have become harder. Capital has dried. And for 2 reasons, now it's more AI and defense, and the kind of the fad has moved to somewhere else. It's also that the industry is moving to another stage. So it was initially a lot of seed funding. For seed funding, you find some, business angels, early VCs, and so on. And so those guys have played their role to kind of jumpstart the industry. There are some guys sitting around, scratching their head and waiting for the infrastructure guys. And the infrastructure guy says, as soon as this is a profitable business, highly replicable, proven, we can channel, billions of capital like we did on other infrastructure things, like solar and wind for energy, but things like, or hydro or those kind of things. But for the moment, our projects collectively are too small and deemed too risky. And so there's a bit of a where the industry needs to kind of go through, where it's too big for the early guys who need to take a lot of risk, and it's too early for the infra guys who will deploy the capital to get to the gigaton. And I think that's a big problem today for the industry, to get the guys who are between Series A and Series B, VCs that still believe in climate, that have managed to raise, their own funds, or corporate ventures. And today, I think that's the big worry in the industry is how we're going to go across those 2-3 years where the relatively small players that were on hold, at least some of them can emerge and then get the funding. Obviously, capital will go where there's a perception of less risk and future demand. So regulation and things like SBTI have a critical role here. Because the more we maintain some kind of list of, will there be regulation or not, what kind of carbon credits will be eligible, other global south, yes, no, Article 6, SBTI, and all this kind of soup, basically for the buyers of CDRs and for the funders, they say, okay, we'll wait, because it's unclear. Will there be CDR demand before 2038 or 2036? Or will it be something that will be pushed in the long distant future? Will SBTI rule out, anything for scope 3 and say, actually, no, carbon removal is bad or no? It's amazing that, those people don't understand the responsibility they have. We'd rather have, maybe not perfect regulation, but stability and visibility, because otherwise capital won't flow in that. And there's a risk, this is a bit of a kind of a warning, but there's a risk that a good chunk of the industry dies in the next 2 years for lack of funding because of uncertainty and regulation.
So, if I have a quick question, I was curious how then, given what you just said, which makes a lot of sense to me, how you read this, say, policy signal from the European Union and say, maybe for tomorrow, maybe for 2036, that's still in the distant future, I agree, but it's there. There's this potential Article 6 market opening up in Europe. Do you see that as significant, as relevant, contributing to what you just said?
Well, it's a step in the right direction, but there's still lots of unknowns. Immediately when you talk to the corporates and the funders, they say, okay, first of all, this is far down the road. There's been so many discussions on, do we allow yes, no, 5%, 10%, whatever. Still unclear. Will that generate demand next year? Likely not. So I think Europe should clarify more and then put a real stick in the ground and say, okay, and it won't change because, Europe is very good at supporting regulation and versions of regulations because it changes all the time. So it's a moving target. That's a way to keep churning out more regulation and keep everyone busy. But that's very bad for stability. And in the short term, SBTI should play its role and say, guys, as of today, it is allowed and actually it is recommended and it's required to maybe bridge the gap between now and 2030, whatever, because now Europe said maybe we're going to do experiments in the early 2030s and so on, but no one knows. So I'm not going to say it's bad what was decided yesterday in the European Parliament, but it's not enough. It's clearly not enough.
The other question I have for you is, because everything you mentioned about financing, I think is true, worldwide. For whether we build our technologies in the north or the south. But can you talk a bit about how much harder it's been, or is it or not, to finance projects in the global south because of the perceived higher risk, etc. How do you think about that, and who are the different actors who are able to move in the global south compared to the global north?
Well, I can ask you the same question because you're probably struggling with the same thing. I was talking about the comparative advantage of Global South, which is, basically sun. The comparative disadvantage is risk, economic and political risk. And capital doesn't like risk. So funding for all kind of projects is, harder than if you're trying to fund something in a kind of at least no country where there's no currency risk, no political risk, no whatever. And I think that's a big problem because the money today still needs to come from the north. At least with Net Zero, we've tried to look at funding from the global south. It has been very difficult. There's one fertilizer company from Morocco who invested in Net Zero, but it's kind of an oddity. Raising debt locally so far has been impossible. Maybe there's a few openings. So that puts basically a cost of capital, if you want, quite high, which is a factor that limits, the funding. And so, although in the long run, CDR will happen in the global south, and the global south will have the lion's share of carbon removal. In the short term, it's undecided because of the typical. But tell us about your experience.
But so yeah, it's the same thing. But for us, for example, when we talk about the global south, we talk to a lot of the DFIs, the development financial institutions who have a thesis or mandate to be catalytical in these sustainable projects in the global south. And indeed, sometimes they only want to see really large projects, and we're too small for that. Is there a world in which we sort of de-risk and grow the technology in the north where capital is easier to get, and then we only come to the global south when we're ready for these really large projects and the DFIs can support us?
I think I can add, yes, I think that announcement was, but I think I can help trying to explain what we've been here in Brazil. We have our national plan to recover the graded wetlands, and we rose money from abroad using the climate fund. But when you talk to the treasury in Brazil, if you want farmers implementing in a much faster way, we have to reduce the interest rates. And we did that, and we do a blended finance, bringing the private sector to share the risks of implementing on the ground and say, okay, let's bring the money from 1% of interest rates a year and merge with the private money, and then we can give loans to farmers in a 10% a year, which is in Brazil low, because the average is 20. So that's, as you mentioned, like the advice, but when you think about scaling, because we will need 60 million, and if you want to hear more, next week we will launch the global project to recover the management, which is Chinese Resilient Agriculture Investment for Net Zero Land Degradation, with FAO, which is a $400 million project. And most of those technologies could be used exactly to help farmers to advance the topic to recover the lands and have more productive lands, not just for pastures, but if they want to recover for fruit, for vegetables, whatever, then they want. We don't want to push to decide what the farmers will do, because different country, different perspectives, but definitely there's a role for the public and private money to share in the blended financing strategy.
I think it's a problem we have to solve because it's also affecting buyers. So for example, I was talking to someone at Frontier a few weeks ago, and we were talking about the different places where we can deploy direct air capture. And they were like, we would really want to deploy direct air capture in Louisiana, but now we don't have policy supports anymore in the US. And then everybody's moving to Canada, but it's too cold in Canada. It's really hard to run these industries over there. And then we were looking at and telling them, yeah, what about Kenya? And they're like, well, Kenya, who's going to finance? And so they're like, we're not sure we want to buy credits because we don't know how you finance. And so we don't really believe that it's going to happen. And so I think it's a problem we have to solve. Like we sort of usually gloss over it, I think, but it's like super core. And we think as the industry is growing, we're hitting those barriers now. So we have to solve this.
And it's interesting because it seems like a chicken and egg. To decide, okay, what we need first. We need regulations or financing, because different countries, again, different realities, and definitely in that case, definitely regulations. I can assume that will be a very important role. And if you want, yeah, please, let's go back to the audience.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the financing. You say it's hard to finance projects in Kenya. I just want to ask you, is it because there's risk in the country? Is it because there's not enough good finance model with the different value chains there? Because it seems to me that it's the perfect place, like you said, and if you have the right off-takers, then yeah, why not? It's the best place to do it.
I think you have to ask the banks, but they'll say political risk, they'll say economical risk, all these different things. You don't really know what's going to happen. I think just to give you an example, and we'd love to be in Kenya. There's like so many good things, but at the same time, like just I think last year, people took over the parliament and try to set it on fire. And then we were like, okay, well, does that have an impact on like your operations? And the banks are gonna think twice, right? So then you see the interest rate rise because of that.
Yeah.
Actually, I wanted to have a question for you because it looks like we're going into this conversation. It's more of a risk management conversation. So on both sides of the equation. So Eduardo, you're talking about the risk management of farmers because they are by definition the most risk-averse population on Earth because we're talking of time frames of 18 months to 24 months. We're talking about the risk structure of buyers and of governments. So I was actually going to ask Itzel, like, how do you see us mitigating this risk on those three fronts?
That's a tricky one. Thank you, Maria. No, I will add one factor to the complex equation, which is speed. Because, if we were an industry that said, okay, guys, we have all the time in the world. Climate is a slow-moving issue. We don't need to scale that quickly. Let's do like solar did, that was minuscule and very high cost in the 1980s. And it took like 30 years before it became, really at scale, low cost, and, something that could now then outpace even the most optimistic projections. If we were in this situation, I would say, okay, we're not growing at the speed we want, but, we can survive it. But there's, 2050, net zero, so we have also collectively a challenge. And so I don't think there's ever been something like so potentially so big as CDR that needs to scale so fast. And so that's also a problem in the equation, which is you can't wait for, slow de-risking because regulation moves forward, because technology becomes more, known and more, perceived as less risky, because business models are well established, because long-term partnerships are established, because otherwise we're in 2040 and we're still removing a few million tons rather than a few, billion tons. So this equation is super complex. I don't know actually how to solve it. That's super worrying, at the industry level. We can think, say, okay, if there's clarity on regulation, if there's mechanisms that create demand for CDR, then the market will play its role. That's the big hope. And the market will play its role where competitive advantages and, more for us than for the guys in the north. But, it has never been done. Just for everyone to remember, there's one number I keep repeating, but it's staggering. We need to remove between 5 and 10 billion tons in 2050. The oil and gas industries combined, so oil and gas, extract 6 billion tons. And you imagine the number of assets that are needed to extract and move and bring to the end user, 6 billion tons. And here, we need to have the same volume doing the other way around. So the amount of capex to be deployed is just incredible. And so that's the equation where, there's a humongous need and humongous potential, but we don't know how to bridge the gap between seed and Series B or C. And it's a complete paradox. And I think a few years from now, people will look at how the world was so stupid to not solve that tiny little thing.
From you, we mentioned some of the way of investments to make the things happen. we want to hear about the AWs and what kind of incentives to move the extra battery to farmers. Because as you mentioned, farmers are risk-taking, but at the same time they are stubborn. No, most part of the world. I am a farmer. I can say that by term actually.
I'm from a family of farmers too, so I fully hear that. I think, yes, the most stubborn people on earth is the right way to put it. Great question. I mentioned that farmers are deeply risk averse, very conservative given their resources. We're talking about land that has been in their family for generations. So anything that could impact soil quality, anything that could impact their future generations, because they see themselves as caregivers, they don't see it as an asset for themselves, they need to make sure that it's there for the next generation. So what do we have to do to make sure that enhanced rock weathering and biochar gets its scale? The first is awareness. So in Brazil, since the 1950s, there's been a movement called rochagem, which allows for remineralizers, which I already mentioned, that are certified by the government to be deployed on soils as natural fertilizer. So this has to do with the regenerative agricultural movement, which Eduardo has published many a great piece about, and it only has 1% adoption. And this adoption rate hasn't scaled. And this is where capital from carbon credits can really create the tipping point. So when you think about adoption, why hasn't it adopted? Number one, risk. Number two, understanding about the science. Number three, the information getting back to the farmer of what it does to the soil. And number four, this is the biggest factor, it's the cost of capital. So the initiatives being taken by the Brazilian government are key for farmers to say, well, if I just keep my cash in the bank, I'm going to get 20%. Why would I change my methodologies now? So this capital incentive, both from both government and the carbon credits, to create a mechanism. So this is why we need companies such as Implanet and Net Zero to really come and promote these changes. Now, our goal is to get past that 1%. For that, we also need mines to have more certified rock powders. Currently in Brazil, there are 1,800 mines. There's a potential for 1,000 mines, but we only have 30. So we need to create this ecosystem where farmers have access to cheap rock powders right next to them, cheap access to the materials that the soil needs, as well as a financial mechanism to help it. That's really the start of it.
Great. And just to reinforce something that I already mentioned to you, but to all of you, we are exactly in the process of the regulation of the national market for carbon. And one of the things that I'm the chair of the carbon chamber at MAPA, it's open the discussion for that so-called new technologies. All of them here, not all of them related directly to agriculture, but please do talk to us, to understand, because we understand good regulations can play a very important role, stable regulations can play a very important role, and can also help to bring finance out to the place. But coming to you, we talk about Europe and the domestic market. Are you seeing, like, for the future, like prioritizing more internal markets or external markets, and what's the part of the global south on the role that we can play? How can we get closer to Brussels, I can put here in Copenhagen?
So if I understand correctly, you're asking to what extent European capital should prioritize domestic capacity or international. I think it's something that's been hotly debated, right? As soon as you open the door to non-domestic international carbon credits for European policy targets, does that mean that European money flows away from Europe? I don't think I think it's like a false dichotomy in the sense that we need both. The domestic Europe to scale in this industry is limited. I see a lot of response from the Peruvian government where we were, where this is really as a catalytical funding to start doing things, otherwise it would take much longer. And I think if we scale technologies, whichever it is, we're at this phase in the curve still where more deployment just means cost will go down, technology will improve, technology readiness level goes up, that will benefit the soil. This is not a local problem, this is not a European problem, it's an international global program, all requires global solutions, right? Global warming doesn't stop at the door, it doesn't stop at national borders. So I get the sentiment, I also get the sentiment from European policymakers about saying, should we prioritize domestic action? Well, we also should, but it can be very complementary. And I think the policy statement that we're getting now that says a limited amount of European climate ambition can be realized in the global south can be an important contribution to achieving relevant scale in all of these pathways.
Yeah, just to complement, so as a company, we will go to where the demand is. So wherever we're going to find buyers for our credits, we will go there. And we'll see whether we get more demand in Norway because there's more certainty on removal integration in ETS, or whether we get more demand in Kenya because of the co-benefits and because of the opening up to international credits. But indeed, as just to try to steelman the position for both sides, if you are European policymakers, I think it makes sense to say, look, it's going to be a big tax on the economy to ask everybody to compensate to get to net zero. Let's make sure that we get some of the economical benefit from that industry. And so we want to have it built here. And then the other part is, well, if we do it somewhere else where it's cheaper, then the overall tax goes down. I think those are how I see both positions. And I agree that it's not either or, it's let's do both. And let's just make sure that if it's done abroad, it's high quality. And I think usually that's what people are afraid of. Is like, well, if we don't have control, if we don't see it, because that in our geography, then we don't really know what's going on. And so I think it's just like, how do we bring trust so that the international credits are very high quality versus just, chasing after very cheap credits.
Yeah.
I have a question.
It's interesting because we've taken this debate a lot from the urban regulation lens. And of course, that's the news and, we are kind of welcome to Europe one way or another. But I'd like to ask Eduardo a question about, viewed from Brazil. Brazil is a powerhouse leveraging photosynthesis to produce food and energy. In this process, through solutions like what we promote, Brazil could become a powerhouse of negative emissions. How is this perceived today, in the kind of political debate? And, is this opportunity that is, in the billions of tons of CO2, which means in the trillions of capex investment, is this opportunity perceived, and what is the legislation kind of doing to accelerate that, given, that I talked about the comparative advantages, but if you look in the global south, within countries, the country that stands out is probably Brazil. So is there a thinking to say, okay, we've succeeded in leveraging photosynthesis for energy and food, can we leverage it directly or indirectly for carbon removal to become, the leading negative emitter in the world?
Sure, thank you so much for the question. I used to be a trader. Trading, we always mention the long and the short. Brazil is long for food. We are the fourth largest food producer. We will surpass US till the end of the decade. China is the number one, India is the number two. We will never reach them. But as we are the largest food exporter in the world, we surpassed US 5 years ago. We are also low in nature. We are also low in carbon, but we are short in money. And that's the beauty, because most of the countries in the global north are short in food. Even China, and India, the largest producers, they don't produce enough to feed themselves. The last number from Embrapa, we are feeding 1.2 billion human beings, 200 billion from Brazil, another billion all over the world. So that's the beauty. How can we connect that in our markets? But at the same time, that's the interesting point for the regulation. And we have an executive in Brazil, more center left, I can say. The legislative in Brazil is more center right. And from the ag industry perspective, perspective, we are also center-right. So it's really funny because we have this internal conflict in the government trying to explain that, folks, we can produce a lot of carbon. The potential of Brazil from different numbers, but it's something around 30 gigatons, 30 gigatons. We export last year 8 million tons, which is a ridiculous number compared to the potential. 30 giga is almost half of the global emission. So yes, we can use for internal consumption. No, the 2.1 giga that we consume, that we need, and we still have a lot to export. But again, we will need investments for the whole value chain. And as you mentioned, and I will go to, but we will produce the carbon that the world needs. So if Europe is saying I want high integrity carbon removal, we can do that. We can do that easily. For some specific countries, say, guys, we only need carbon credits. We do have Red Plus and a lot of other things that we can easily produce. That's part of the puzzle. But the beauty here again is how can we collaborate to speed the implementation of that. And again, not just here in Brazil, because we know for at least for tropical regions, what we're doing here, we can scale up to a lot of other countries in the world using these South-South collaboration. And
Should we go to
if you
questions?
have some questions from the audience,
Should we go to audience questions?
sure, please.
Eduardo, thank you so much for sharing these insights. It's so good when we hear from what's happening on the ground in Brazil. It's really fantastic.
Please, don't be shy. Yes, please.
Edu, you and I have both worked in agribusinesses in the past. I'm curious, what's the role you see for the industrial supply chains that are present in the current stage of these carbon removal practices to get involved or not? I think there's also this chicken and egg dynamic playing out of is it ready enough for us to get involved? So whether it's Bayer, whether it's the grain movers, how should they get involved in the agricultural side of this practice?
Amazing. I think considering the regulations, the way that Brazil did the regulations very similar than EU, the EU ETS. So we create our own Brazilian ETS systems. But it's also interesting when you see when you look around food systems, the in-setting strategy could seem like, okay, it's much easier than offsetting strategy, so let's produce our own credits. But when some of those technologies are implemented on the ground, and when you start to talk to farmers and value chain companies, they realize that, wow, some of those credits, the value is much higher than the value that I can include in my product. So I cannot include biochar prices in a soybean to produce bacon in China. It's not possible. So why I will do that? So let's produce a low carbon soybean, but how can I put that low carbon in one place, but the biochar carbon credits in another place, and then we can do a lot of good stuff. And if I will give you an example. I love that example because I'm working with a sugar. Sorry, I came from a sugar cane family. But corn ethanol. No, when you think about corn ethanol, if I talk to a farmer saying, "Oh, if you do good agricultural practices, it's AOM. But if you have the CO2, the residual CO2, I can inject its bags." No? If I apply rocks, it's ARW. If I burn, I will not burn, sorry, no, but you understand me. Burn in a high temperature, high pressure, I can create biochar. There's at least 15 different kind of technologies to be implemented. So if I am Cargill, for example, no, or FS, or Impasa, in Brazil, those four combined produces almost 80% of the ethanol. but I should start. Where I should start? I can do all of those things. It's too complicated, no? Because again, we know farmers are very conservative. So how can we bring those technologies? If you try to do that, it will take a time. But if the company, if the trader of the input company can go there and
a biochar plant with Advos, which is the second largest ethanol producer. And they are going to use the biochar in the field to increase yield and sell the carbon credits to finance that. And it's a way to get that scale because we are dealing with, someone who has, huge volumes, millions of tons of claim. And so we can deploy, 50, 70 production systems just there. So here it's a company thinking, okay, I'm going to leverage the biochar for my own usage, my resilience, my yield, and sell the carbon credits. Another example of insetting is Marubeni in coffee. Marubeni is buying at a price premium the coffee that is produced using biochar because it's a low carbon coffee. We have also such an operation with Nespresso. And so these are ways where, the whole value chain can find, different values. So the farmer finds value, the trader finds value, the end brand finds value. And sometimes keeping the physical product and the carbon removal together, sometimes separating it. So I think it's quite illustrates what you were mentioning.
thank you so much, amazing. And just to reinforce, different products, different approaches. No, again, in soybean is very hard. No, but in coffee is different. No, coffee you can add value. With cocoa you can add value. So for each 1 bag of coffee you create, it is you create 99 or 100 bags equivalent in value in a capsule of Nespresso. So there is a lot of value that can be potentially shared through the value chain. But again, most of those companies, as you mentioned, some are public, some are not. But they also publish their own challenges for regenerative agriculture, saying, oh, I will do 1 million hectares. No, most of them, they have no clue how to achieve that. And that's an opportunity for all of us, no? To understand, to say, here we are to help.
Just getting 1,000 hectares is so hard.
Exactly.
Much less than a million.
We know that, we know how hard it is. And, but again, it will be even harder without partnerships through supply chain.
Exactly.
That's the
Maybe
main
just to pick up on what you said, so it sounds like also you're finding ways to finance these projects by working with big corporates who are just financing it themselves within their own supply chains, which is good.
Yeah, it's a model. I don't know how replicable it is with other technologies, but what we have developed is a franchise model. Like McDonald's, so we basically built a plant for a third party, they finance it. We bring, of course, the hardware, the software, the MRV solution, the backend, the brand. We help them, we support them through technical support, spare parts and so on to run the plant, to train their teams. They apply our standards and we take care of helping them commercialize the carbon credits. And history will tell, but that can be a way to accelerate deployment rather than us one by one building plants. Large agri players actually are interested to bring the thing inside their operations because it's so synergetic. So at least that's an hypothesis. Time will tell. Very good.
This is a very interesting model, and I think a scalable one, or something that lets you focus on the technology kind of flies into the dark. So do you have any current deployments like that, or is it a future?
Now we already have one plant operating under this scheme in Brazil. So it's actually it's funny because the franchisee has not wanted to communicate yet, and even to say we inaugurate the plant while the plant is actually running. So, but maybe in a few weeks you'll hear about it. What I mentioned with Advos, this is the same scheme, so franchising, and we have lots of discussion for next year. So it's not just theory; it is kind of things happening for real.
Eduardo, I think this question is for you. You don't have too many policy makers, but I think you're influential in that kind of sense in Brazil. And so you were talking about the value for the whole value chain, and I think we're talking about incentives for carbon as like kind of carbon tax or carbon incentives, markets, monetization. But because of the integration to all of the value chain, I think there is also a place to kind of incentivize certain industries to just accept carbon innovation, let's say. Do you think it is a feasible idea to kind of create a removal kind of target or removal incentives through reduction of tax or whatever, and then it might affect people to operate and integrate it at a faster pace?
Yes, actually, Brazil was one of the first countries 15 years ago, more than 15 years ago, to put a special policy for agriculture. We use ABC, low carbon agriculture. We selected some technologies at that time, 6 technologies. We advanced it now, we are in the second decade. So the first decade, we capture or reduce the emissions of 600 million tons, and nothing was captured in our NDC, which is bizarre. We just have a box in our NDC, but that's okay. We are living in the second term, which is ABC Plus. So it's 8 technologies combined that have a power to capture or reduce the emissions of 1.1 giga. If you are there, if your technology is there, you can ask for reduced interest rates from the government. So if farmers want to use any one of those 8, the average interest rates run from 15 to 10% a year. So you have a 5% of reduction of interest rates, which is a very interesting policy because we are promoting good agricultural practices for farmers. And once we did that, I say, farmers say, oh, okay, if I put more tillage, it's better than blowing the soil. I say, yes, but prove me. I say, I don't want to prove to you. If you do that, you will pay 15. If you do that, then 95% of Brazil use no tillage. 95. We're the largest country. 13 million hectares is using 13 today. It's the size of Germany. So that's the beauty. And again, oh, I want more. I want to see biochar. I want to see bags. I want to see AirW. I want to see salt organic carbon, which is ridiculous that we don't have yet. We have to talk to the government. The place of the management of bias, but it's not because I have the mandate. But it's the carbon chamber. And we are open to discuss exactly what kind of technologies, and then we can talk to the Treasury Minister to understand, okay, where is the fiscal space? If we can find the fiscal space enough, agriculture in Brazil is a $300 million business, no 1.3 billion reais. So there's no fiscal space for all the things, but that's again the beauty, for bonds and for those kind of places. We can raise money.
We should add that this wasn't said on this panel, but last year in November of 2024, the Brazilian government passed a revolutionary piece of legislation. Now, implementation will come to Eduardo's hard work, but this legislation actually was one of the few in the world to make provisions for carbon removal. Furthermore, the Brazilian government has gone so far as to ask insurance providers to include carbon credits as part of a select portion of their portfolio. So when we actually look at all of the supply chain, all of the incentives, many things are happening in Brazil, and this is very much to much of Europe and work in the chain.
Yeah, we're trying. But it's interesting, like for the insurance, yesterday it was, if you want to hear more, there's insurance house 3 blocks out from here. And it's funny because we're talking, say, we're friends of folks, and say, no, we're friends. But they have the money, it's the only sector in Brazil, it's mandatory 5% of the money should be invested in carbon credits. And again, the fight internally is in the decree. We don't have the decree yet. We have the law, but we don't have the decree. It's what kind of carbon credits do we need? And I will, we have to close, but I will end with a question to all of you, a short remarks. But it's interesting because sometimes when you put a high-level regulation, sometimes it's very hard for the people to implement it, and not just farmers, but all over the world. When you have a very low regulations, we don't find enough resources to implement. So there is also here a challenge, but we want to hear like your final remarks, and if you can add some points related to that. Let's start with you.
So I think if we want to scale carbon removal in the global south and ensure that value reaches local product developers, project developers and farmers, I think there's 2 things that are on my wish list. I think the first is, yes, I think compliance markets can be a very strong policy signal to create more demand and de-risk investments. And I agree with Axel that there's a lot of work to be done still from where we stand today with the European Union, but I do think we're moving into the right direction in that sense. But secondly, and perhaps more importantly, I strongly believe, and I will admit that I'm a bit biased in terms of biochar thinking, because we do biochar, a bit of biochar lover. But if you take the carbon economy or the bioeconomy at the heart of these models as a starting point, we talked about the co-benefits, but that's really what this is all about. It really is about creating an economy from agricultural waste streams, creating added value for farmers, and the carbon credits, be it monetary market or compliance markets, are a flywheel. They lower barriers, they become a constant stream of revenue, which is very important and very welcome. But I personally, we as a company believe that the bioeconomy at the heart of these projects will make sure that they become profitable, scalable, and reach the stakeholders in the host countries that you want to see benefit from these activities.
So on my end, I pushed on financing, so I'm just going to repeat that. I think we need to fix financing in the global south. And then maybe the second, just to link it to Brazil, I would love to come do direct air capture in Brazil. All I need is CO2 storage. So if anybody knows where to store CO2 on the ground in Brazil, let me know.
For me, on the policy side, we're doing our job in Europe. We need our help in Brazil, so we need the Brazilian government to get deals with Europe, with Singapore, all of these great countries, making bilateral agreements so that we can sell our credits internationally. On the education side, we need help with the farmers, for them to understand the benefits and the value that this brings to them, so we can de-risk their business and increase adoption.
Yeah, I'll finish saying that I have a dream that it will not only be, Europe or the global north, cleaning up its regulation, making, visibility of its regulation, but that a few countries from the global south, starting with Brazil, will really see the opportunity for their economy to improve the agriculture, but to create additional sources of revenue. If you think of the billion tons, and I'm talking of billion tons of carbon that is removed every year in Brazil through nature and photosynthesis, and this is wasted because all of it goes back into the atmosphere. I hope that some countries, starting in Brazil, because we're in Brazil, because net zero is very Brazilian, and because Brazil is the largest, country in the global south, at least in the tropical land for agriculture, that basically there's a kind of national strategy to say we need to lead this new industry. We need to lead on the technological development, we need to lead on the business model, we need to lead on the deployment. And by the way, Brazil can be an exporter then of such technology. So my dream is that, a number of countries, starting with Brazil, will seize the opportunity like a bit, I'm trying to do an analogy like the US has been trying to do for DAC, creating, huge incentives, DAC hubs, and saying, hey, we need to master this technology and we need to create, competitive advantage. Brazil needs to do the same with sun and sun-related carbon removal solutions.
Great. Thank you so much. Cheers. I will finish just telling a small story because it's also about using the good things that you have. Not only the good things we won't change the move the needle, but if you add money, if you add good people, if you add education, we can change that. In the 70s, Brazil was one of the largest food importers in the world. We do have the poorest soils in the world. Juta Yuan, it's not me. We have the poorest soils in the world. In 50 years, because Japan first, JICA invested in to create Embrapa, and then a lot of other countries invested to conquer the Cerrado and to say, oh, okay, it's a wasteland. It's not a wasteland. It's a very interesting biome. If you can see Cerrado, you will see that in the corridor. It's an amazing place to be. But probably not for agriculture, it's like 50 years ago. We apply lime, we start to apply more fertilizer, we bring soybean, which is a plant from Manchuria, 45 degrees up north, and today we are the largest soybean producer in the world. And why? Because we bring all good minds together, we bring the right resources, we bring technology, we prove the science, and we make it happen. And if we could do that in agriculture, definitely we could do that for CDRs. Let's do it together. Thank you so much.